Blood trickled down Makayla Washington's wrist where the handcuffs bit into her skin. First-class ticket in hand, top attorney credentials in her briefcase. Yet here she was, being dragged through the terminal like a criminal. "Badge numbers," she whispered coldly. "I'll remember every single one." Before we dive into this shocking story of injustice at 35,000 feet, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you've ever experienced or witnessed discrimination while traveling, and subscribe to join our community fighting for justice. Now let's uncover how a respected attorney's routine flight turned into a battle that would change an entire industry. Makayla Washington rolled her neck from side to side, trying to release the tension that had built up during 3 weeks of non-stop work. At 42, she had established herself as one of Chicago's premier civil rights attorneys, and the Winters v. Global Tech case had just added another landmark victory to her impressive record. The jury had awarded her client, a black software engineer, $8 million in damages after proving systematic racial discrimination in the company's promotion practices. The victory was sweet, but exhausting. Now, all Makayla wanted was to get back to Atlanta, sleep in her own bed, and spend the weekend recovering before diving into her next case. She checked her watch, 5:15 in the afternoon. Her Atlantic Airways flight 3721 would begin boarding in 20 minutes. "Ms. Washington?" The receptionist at the first-class lounge called. "There's a call for you from your office." Makayla sighed and took the phone. Her assistant's voice came through, excited. "The winter settlement check just arrived. $8 million sitting right here on my desk." "Perfect timing," Makayla said, managing a tired smile despite her exhaustion. "I'll be back Monday. Lock it in the safe until then." She handed the phone back to the receptionist and gathered her belongings. Her designer briefcase contained confidential files from the case, along with her laptop and personal items. After 3 years fighting global tech, she felt entitled to her first-class seat home, a small luxury she rarely allowed herself. The boarding announcement came over the loudspeaker, and Makayla made her way to the gate. The line for first class was short, just a few business executives in expensive suits. She stepped into line behind them. "Excuse me, ma'am." The gate agent, a young white woman with Melissa on her name tag, looked up from her computer. "This line is for first-class boarding only." Makayla kept her expression neutral, a skill honed from years in courtrooms. "Yes, I know. I have a first-class ticket." She held up her boarding pass. Melissa's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, let me just double-check that for you." She reached for Makayla's boarding pass, something Makayla noticed she hadn't done for the 3 white men ahead of her. "It's correct," Makayla said firmly, but handed over the document anyway. Melissa scrutinized it, glanced at her computer, then reluctantly handed it back. "Yes, seat 2A. You can board now." Makayla walked down the jetway, swallowing her irritation. This wasn't new to her, these little moments of doubt, these small indignities that reminded her that no matter her achievements, some people would always see her skin color first. The cabin of the Boeing 787 was cool and quietly elegant. Makayla found her window seat in the second row and settled in, placing her briefcase carefully under the seat in front of her. The leather seat was wide and comfortable, and for the first time that day, she felt her muscles begin to relax. Other first-class passengers filed in, mostly white men in business attire, a few white women, and an elderly Asian couple. The flight attendant, a blonde woman in her mid-30s with Bethany Keller on her name tag, greeted each passenger warmly as they boarded. "Good evening, sir. Welcome aboard. Can I get you a pre-flight beverage?" "Hello there. Seat 3C is just to your right. Would you like champagne or orange juice before takeoff?" When Bethany reached Makayla's row, her smile dimmed noticeably. She gave a curt nod and moved on without offering a drink. Makayla noticed but didn't say anything. After the day she'd had, a confrontation was the last thing she wanted. 10 minutes later, Bethany returned with a tray of drinks, distributing them to the other first-class passengers. She walked past Makayla without acknowledging her. "Excuse me," Makayla said politely. "Could I get some water, please?" Bethany glanced at her. "I'll be back with water for everyone after we finish the pre-flight service." Makayla watched as Bethany continued serving champagne and juice to the remaining passengers. When the flight attendant returned to the galley, Makayla pressed the call button. Bethany ignored it for several minutes before finally approaching with visible reluctance. "Yes," her tone was clipped. "I'd still like some water, please," Makayla said calmly. "We're about to begin boarding the main cabin. I'll bring water during our regular beverage service after takeoff." Before Makayla could respond, commotion erupted at the front of the cabin. A late arrival was boarding, a tall white man in an expensive suit, probably in his mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair and an air of entitled impatience. "Sorry I'm late," he announced to no one in particular. Conference call ran long. Bethany immediately transformed, her frosty demeanor melting into radiant warmth. "Not a problem at all, Mr. Harrington. We're just happy you made it. Let me help you with your bag." The man, Mr. Harrington, proceeded down the aisle, stopping at Makayla's row. He checked his boarding pass, then frowned at her. "I believe you're in my seat," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Makayla looked up at him, then down at her own boarding pass. 2A? No, this is definitely my assigned seat. Harrington's expression hardened. "I always sit in 2A. I'm a platinum, executive member." "I understand, sir, but this is the seat I was assigned." Makayla held up her boarding pass as evidence. Instead of checking his own ticket, Harrington turned to Bethany, who had appeared at his side. "There seems to be a confusion about seating." Bethany didn't even glance at Makayla's boarding pass. "Let me take care of this for you, Mr. Harrington." She turned to Makayla. "Ma'am, there appears to be a mistake. Mr. Harrington is assigned to this seat." "No, there's no mistake," Makayla replied, maintaining her composure despite her growing frustration. "My boarding pass clearly says 2A, and that's what the gate agent confirmed." "Perhaps you misread it," Bethany suggested, her tone condescending. "Let me see your boarding pass." Makayla handed it over. Bethany looked at it, frowned slightly, then looked at Harrington's pass. A flash of uncertainty crossed her face. "Well," she said, "Mr. Harrington is one of our most valued customers. I'm sure we can find you another seat in first class." "That's not necessary," Makayla replied firmly. "I selected this seat specifically for the legroom, paid for it, and I'd like to keep it as assigned." Harrington's face flushed with anger. "Do you know who I am? I've flown over 2 million miles with this airline." "I don't care if you've flown to the moon and back," Makayla said, her patience wearing thin. "This is my assigned seat." Several nearby passengers had started watching the exchange. An older white woman across the aisle muttered something about being difficult. A young man 2 rows back had taken out his phone and appeared to be recording. Bethany leaned in close to Makayla and lowered her voice. "Ma'am, I need you to cooperate. You're delaying our departure." "I am cooperating. I'm sitting in my assigned seat with my valid ticket," Makayla replied, loud enough for others to hear. "If there's a seating issue, perhaps you should check the airline's records instead of automatically assuming I'm the one who's wrong." Bethany straightened up, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Wait here," she said, before guiding Harrington back to the front of the cabin. Makayla sat, heart pounding, but outwardly calm. She'd faced down corporate legal teams and hostile judges. She wasn't about to be intimidated by a flight attendant and an entitled passenger. Minutes later, Bethany returned, with the captain and a man wearing an air marshal badge. The passengers around Makayla fell silent. "Ma'am," the captain said, "I understand there's an issue with seating arrangements." "There's no issue," Makayla replied. "I'm in my assigned seat. The confusion is with this gentleman." She nodded toward Harrington, who was hovering behind the captain, who seems to think his status entitles him to any seat he wants. The air marshal stepped forward. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to come with me." Makayla stared at him in disbelief. "On what grounds?" "Disturbing the peace and refusing crew member instructions," he replied mechanically. "I've disturbed nothing, and I've refused no legitimate instructions," Makayla said, her attorney instincts kicking in. "What's happening here is clear discrimination, and I won't stand for it." The word discrimination caused a ripple of murmurs through the cabin. Bethany's face paled slightly. "Final warning," the air marshal said. "Exit the aircraft voluntarily or we'll remove you." Makayla looked around at the watching passengers, some uncomfortable, some recording, some pretending not to notice. She slowly gathered her briefcase. "I want all your names and badge numbers," she said clearly. "And just so everyone understands, what's happening? I'm a black woman being removed from my rightfully purchased first-class seat to accommodate a white man. In 2025, I will not let this stand." As she stood, Harrington was already sliding into her seat, a smug expression on his face. The last thing Makayla saw before being escorted off was Bethany leaning down to ask him if he wanted champagne. The jetway felt like a gauntlet as Makayla was marched back toward the terminal, the air marshal close behind her. At the gate, 2 more security personnel waited, broad-shouldered men with stern expressions and hands resting near their holsters. "James Bradshaw, Atlantic Airways Security," the taller one said, not bothering with pleasantries. His colleague, slightly shorter but equally imposing, didn't introduce himself at all. "Makayla Washington, attorney at law," she responded calmly, "and I'd like to know on what grounds I'm being detained." Bradshaw exchanged glances with the unnamed officer. "We received reports of a disruptive passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions." "That's absolutely false," Makayla stated firmly. "I was sitting in my assigned seat when another passenger demanded it. The flight attendant took his side without verification, and when I showed my boarding pass proving I was correct, they called security instead of resolving the situation properly." The second officer, whose name tag read Kevin Miller, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us to the security office for questioning." "Am I under arrest?" Makayla asked, aware that several bystanders had stopped to watch. "Not at this time," Miller replied. "But if you don't cooperate, that could change quickly." Makayla noticed a young woman in the gathering crowd holding up a phone, recording the interaction. "Good," she thought. "Evidence." "I'll cooperate," Makayla said, "but I want it on record that I'm doing so under protest, and that this entire situation stems from racial discrimination by Atlantic Airways staff." Miller grabbed her upper arm roughly. "This way." "I can walk on my own," Makayla said, trying to pull away. His grip tightened. "Protocol." They began moving through the terminal, Bradshaw in front, Miller maintaining his grip on Makayla's arm, and the air marshal following behind. The scene drew stares from travelers rushing to their gates. Makayla held her head high, even as humiliation burned through her. "You're hurting me," she said quietly to Miller. "Should have thought about that before causing trouble," he muttered back. As they approached a corridor marked Airport Security, another uniformed officer joined them, this one wearing an airport police badge. His name tag read Daniel Reynolds. "What's the situation?" Reynolds asked Bradshaw. "Disruptive passenger removed from Atlantic Airways 3721. Refused crew instructions, created a disturbance." Reynolds looked Makayla up and down, taking in her tailored suit and designer briefcase. His expression remained impassive. "Cuff her." "What?" Makayla's composure finally cracked. "That's completely unnecessary." "Standard procedure for combative subjects," Reynolds stated flatly. "I am not combative. I've been cooperative despite being wrongfully removed from my flight." Reynolds nodded to Miller, who pulled Makayla's hands behind her back. The metal handcuffs were cold against her skin and ratcheted too tight, digging into her wrists. "These are too tight," she winced. "They're supposed to be uncomfortable," Reynolds replied without sympathy. "Discourages resistance." By now, Makayla was being paraded through the busiest part of the terminal, hands cuffed behind her back, escorted by 3 large men in uniform. Travelers stopped to stare. Some took photos. The humiliation was almost unbearable, but Makayla channeled it into determination. "I want all your names and badge numbers," she said loudly enough for bystanders to hear. "What you're doing is unlawful detention and excessive use of force. You can file a complaint later." Bradshaw dismissed her. "Oh, I'll do much more than file a complaint," Makayla promised. "I'm a civil rights attorney, and what's happening right now is textbook discrimination and abuse of power." That caught Reynolds' attention. He exchanged glances with the others, But they continued walking, guiding Makayla through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" and into a sterile hallway lined with numbered doors. They led her to a small room containing only a metal table bolted to the floor and 3 chairs. The walls were bare except for a security camera in the corner. They directed her to sit, but didn't remove the handcuffs. "The cuffs need to come off," Makayla insisted. "They're cutting into my skin." "When we've determined you're not a security threat," Reynolds replied. "A security threat? I'm a 5'4" attorney with a valid ticket who was removed from a flight because a white man wanted my seat. This is absurd." The door opened, and a woman in an Atlantic Airways uniform entered. Her name tag identified her as Sandra Coleman, Customer Relations Manager. Her practiced smile didn't reach her eyes. "Ms. Washington, I apologize for this unfortunate situation. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." "No," Makayla interrupted. "There was no misunderstanding. There was blatant discrimination by your flight attendant, who took the word of a white man over mine despite clear evidence that I was in my correct seat." Coleman's smile faltered. "These are serious allegations, Ms. Washington. I assure you that Atlantic Airways does not discriminate." "Save the corporate script," Makayla cut in. "I want these handcuffs removed immediately, and I want the names and badge numbers of everyone involved in this incident." Coleman looked uncomfortable, then nodded to Reynolds. "Please remove the restraints." Reynolds hesitated, then complied, reluctantly. When the cuffs came off, Makayla rubbed her wrists, noting the red marks where the metal had dug into her skin. Small droplets of blood had formed where the skin had broken. "I'll need medical attention for these injuries," Makayla stated, "and I want it documented." Coleman's professional facade cracked slightly. "Ms. Washington, I'm sure we can resolve this without escalating further. Atlantic Airways would like to offer you a travel voucher for the inconvenience." Makayla laughed without humor. "A travel voucher? I was publicly humiliated, physically injured, and subjected to discriminatory treatment. A voucher isn't going to cut it." She reached for her briefcase, causing Reynolds to tense up. Slowly, deliberately, she removed her phone. "I'm calling my law partner," she explained, "and then I'll be contacting the media. This isn't going away with a voucher and an insincere apology." "That won't be necessary," Coleman insisted. "We can work this out." "Officer Reynolds," Makayla said, ignoring Coleman. "Your badge number, please." Reynolds crossed his arms. "You can get that information through official channels." "Officer Miller? Officer Bradshaw?" She looked at each of them in turn. Both remained silent. "Fine," Makayla said, making a show of typing into her phone. "Security camera footage will identify you all anyway. And I've noticed at least 3 passengers were recording when you removed me from the plane." She dialed her law partner's number. After 2 rings, he picked up. "Jackson, it's Makayla. I need your help." She quickly summarized what had happened. "Yes, I'm still being detained. No, they haven't charged me with anything. I need you to contact our media connections and have someone meet me at Chicago O'Hare, Terminal 3 security office. Yes, I'm documenting everything." She ended the call and looked up at the increasingly uncomfortable airline representative and security officers. "Ms. Washington," Coleman tried again, "I'm authorized to offer you a full refund of your ticket, price plus a $5,000 travel credit, if we can resolve this matter privately." "Ms. Coleman," Makayla replied, her voice steel, "what happened today wasn't a customer service issue. It was civil rights violation. You can tell Atlantic Airways to expect formal legal action. I will not be silenced or bought off." The door opened again, and a man in a suit entered. "I'm Robert Turner, Atlantic Airways legal counsel. Ms. Washington, I understand there's been an incident." "An incident?" Makayla repeated incredulously. "Is that what you call racially motivated discrimination, followed by unlawful detention and excessive force?" Turner maintained a neutral expression. "These are serious allegations that would require substantial evidence." "Which I have," Makayla cut in. "Multiple witnesses, video recordings, and physical injuries." She held up her wrists, showing the marks and dried blood. "Not to mention The airline's own records that will prove I was in my assigned seat when your staff had me forcibly removed to accommodate a white passenger. Turner's professional demeanor slipped for just a moment. I suggest we discuss this privately. No, Makayla stated firmly. I've been detained publicly, handcuffed publicly, and humiliated publicly. I won't now be coerced privately. She stood up. Am I free to go? Or am I under arrest? The security officers looked to Turner, who nodded reluctantly. You're free to go, Ms. Washington. Good, Makayla said, gathering her belongings. And just so we're clear, this isn't over, not by a long shot. As she walked toward the door, she turned back one last time. Badge numbers. I'll remember every single one. The taxi ride from O'Hare to downtown Chicago felt surreal. Makayla stared out the window at the city lights blurring through a light evening rain, her mind replaying the events on the plane in vivid detail. Her wrists throbbed where the handcuffs had cut into them. The emergency room doctor had cleaned and bandaged the abrasions, documenting them as consistent with overly tight restraints, providing Makayla with medical evidence for what she knew would become a legal battle. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications since she'd been released from the security office. Jackson had mobilized their law firm's crisis team. 3 news outlets had already reached out for interviews. Social media was beginning to pick up fragments of the story, with shaky cell phone videos showing portions of her removal from the aircraft. The taxi pulled up to her hotel, not the one she'd originally booked for a single night before her flight, but a higher-end establishment arranged by Jackson for an extended stay. Atlantic Airways' actions had cost her more than dignity. They'd disrupted her entire schedule. Ms. Washington? The hotel manager greeted her personally in the lobby. Mr. Williams called ahead. We've prepared the executive suite for you and arranged for the hotel doctor to be available if needed. Thank you, Makayla replied. The professional courtesy, a stark contrast to her treatment hours earlier. In her suite, Makayla finally allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She sank onto the edge of the bed, hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline that had sustained her began to ebb. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. This wasn't the time for tears. This was the time for action. Her phone rang. Jackson again. I've got something you need to see, he said without preamble. Checking your email now. Makayla opened her laptop and found Jackson's message. Attached were 3 video files from different passengers on the flight. She clicked on the first. 1. The footage was shaky but clear enough. It showed her calmly explaining to Bethany that she was in her assigned seat. It captured Harrington's entitled demand and Bethany's immediate deference to him without checking his ticket. Most damning was the moment when Bethany finally looked at both boarding passes and realized Makayla was right. The brief flash of recognition on her face before she doubled down and called for security anyway. This is gold, Makayla murmured. Keep watching, Jackson instructed. The 3rd video is the one that's going to blow this wide open. The 3rd video had been taken from several rows back. It showed the air marshal and captain approaching, but what made it truly damning was what happened after Makayla was escorted off. The passenger had continued recording, capturing Bethany leaning down to Harrington with a conspiratorial smile. Sorry about the confusion, Mr. Harrington. We always want our board members to have their preferred seats. Board member. Trevor Harrington wasn't just a frequent flyer. He was on Atlantic Airways' board of directors. Did you catch that? Jackson asked. I did, Makayla confirmed, her legal mind already calculating how this changed things. This wasn't just discrimination by a flight attendant. This was corporate policy coming from the top. Exactly. And there's more. Check your texts. Makayla found a message from an unknown number. This isn't the first time. I have information. Meet tomorrow? Amara Jones, Atlantic Airways. Who's Amara Jones? She asked Jackson. Flight attendant trainee. She was on your flight, observing. Bethany. She reached out to me after seeing the news about what happened. Says she's witnessed systematic discrimination at the airline and wants to help. Makayla felt a surge of vindication. Set up the meeting. Somewhere private. Already done. Coffee shop 3 blocks from your hotel, 10 a.m. After ending the call with Jackson, Makayla opened her laptop again. The story was spreading faster than she'd anticipated. Justice at 35,000 feet was trending. People were sharing their own experiences with discrimination on Atlantic Airways flights. What had happened to her wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern. Her investigative instincts taking over, Makayla began searching for previous incidents involving Atlantic Airways and discrimination claims. Most had been settled quietly, with confidentiality agreements keeping details out of public view, but patterns emerged nonetheless. Black passengers removed from first class. Middle Eastern travelers subjected to random additional security checks. Latino customers having their identification questioned despite valid documentation. Do you recognize these injustices? Have you or someone you know experienced discrimination while traveling? Comment number 1 if you believe companies should be held accountable for racial bias, and number 2 if you think Makayla should pursue this case all the way to court. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow this journey for justice. Now, as dawn breaks on a new day, will Makayla find an unexpected ally within the very company that wronged her? By morning, Makayla had compiled a preliminary case file. Atlantic Airways had a history of discrimination complaints dating back years, but had successfully kept them from becoming major public relations issues through quick, quiet settlements and aggressive legal tactics. At precisely 10 a.m., Makayla entered the coffee shop Jackson had arranged for the meeting with Amara Jones. She spotted a young black woman in the corner, nervously checking her phone. She couldn't have been more than 28, dressed in civilian clothes but with the perfect posture of someone trained in customer service. "Ms. Jones?" Makayla approached the table. "I'm Makayla Washington." Amara stood quickly, extending her hand. "Thank you for meeting me. I've been following what happened to you and I couldn't stay silent anymore." They ordered coffee, and once the server left, Amara leaned forward, speaking quietly. "I've been with Atlantic Airways for 11 months as a trainee. That day on your flight, I was shadowing Bethany Keller. She's been with the airline for 12 years and is considered one of their exemplary flight attendants." Amara's expression suggested she disagreed with that assessment. "What can you tell me about what happened?" Makayla asked. "Everything you experienced is part of Atlantic's unofficial executive courtesy policy. They train us to give special treatment to certain passengers, board members, major shareholders, politicians, celebrities. There's an actual list in the employee handbook. Trevor Harrington is number 8 on that list. And this special treatment includes displacing other passengers from their assigned seats." Amara nodded. "If necessary. Usually it's done before boarding, but sometimes..." She trailed off. "Sometimes they have to remove people who are already seated," Makayla finished. "Yes, but there's more." Amara pulled out her phone. "I've been documenting incidents for months. Bethany is particularly bad, but she's not the only one. There's a culture of discrimination that comes from the top down." She showed Makayla a series of notes detailing specific incidents. A black family upgraded from first class to economy to make room for white executives. Middle Eastern passengers subjected to extra security checks that mysteriously only affected them. Latino passengers having their boarding passes checked multiple times while white passengers walked by unquestioned. "How widespread is this?" Makayla asked. "It's systemic," Amara confirmed. "Not every employee participates, but those who object don't last long. I've been written up twice already for failure to uphold company standards after questioning these practices." "Why are you coming forward? You're risking your job." Amara's expression hardened. "Because what happened to you was wrong. Because I've seen it happen too many times. Because if someone doesn't stand up, nothing will change." Makayla studied the young woman, impressed by her courage. "This information is incredibly valuable, but using it will expose you." "I know. I've thought about it. I'm prepared to testify if needed." After finishing their meeting, Makayla returned to her hotel with a clearer picture of what she was up against. This wasn't just about one incident or one flight attendant. It was about a corporate culture that enabled and encouraged discrimination. Her phone rang. An unknown number with Atlantic Airways area code. She answered cautiously. Ms. Washington, this is Richard Spencer, Chief Legal Officer for Atlantic Airways. Makayla sat up straighter. Mr. Spencer, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I understand there was an unfortunate incident yesterday, Spencer began, his tone carefully measured. On behalf of Atlantic Airways, I want to express our sincere apologies and assure you that what happened doesn't reflect our company values. Strange, Makayla replied. Because I've spent the morning gathering evidence that suggests what happened to me perfectly reflects your company's values and practices. A pause. Ms. Washington, I'd strongly caution against making unfounded allegations that could be construed as defamatory. There's nothing unfounded about my allegations, Mr. Spencer. I have video evidence, witness statements, and documentation of a pattern of similar incidents involving your airline. I see. Spencer's tone chilled. Then perhaps we should discuss this matter through proper legal channels. If you're planning litigation, you should be aware that Atlantic Airways will defend itself vigorously against any unfounded claims. We have substantial resources and a track record of successfully resolving such matters. Is that a threat, Mr. Spencer? Merely a statement of fact. I would hate to see you damage your professional reputation pursuing a case you cannot win. Makayla felt a surge of determination. Thank you for your concern about my reputation, Mr. Spencer. But you should be more worried about Atlantic Airways' reputation once the full story becomes public. And make no mistake, it will become public. I'll have our team prepare a settlement offer, Spencer said, his tone clipped. I suggest you consider it carefully when it arrives. The call ended, and Makayla immediately dialed Jackson. They're already trying to intimidate me, she told him. Spencer just called with veiled threats about countersuits and damaged reputations. Jackson chuckled. That means they're worried. What's our next move? We go full steam ahead, Makayla decided. File the lawsuit. Contact the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Division and prepare for a media statement. No confidentiality. Agreements. No quiet settlements. It's time Atlantic Airways faces real consequences. As she ended the call, Makayla looked out her hotel window at the Chicago skyline. What had started as a routine business trip had transformed into something much bigger. A fight not just for her own dignity, but for justice on behalf of countless others who had faced similar discrimination without the resources or platform to fight back. Spencer's threat only strengthened her resolve. Atlantic Airways had picked the wrong person to discriminate against. They were about to learn that some battles weren't worth the cost of fighting, especially against an opponent who knew the law as well as she did. The conference room at Williams & Washington law firm buzzed with activity. Associates huddled around laptops, paralegals sorted through document boxes, and in the center of it all, Makayla and Jackson strategized their approach against Atlantic Airways. We've identified 37 previous discrimination complaints against the airline in the past 5 years, announced Tara Chen, their head researcher. 22 were settled with confidentiality agreements, 9 were dismissed on technical grounds before discovery, and 6 are still pending. Any patterns in how they handle these cases? Makayla asked, reviewing the summary document. Definitely, Tara confirmed. They move aggressively for dismissal, and if that fails, they offer settlements with strict NDAs. They've never allowed a discrimination case to reach trial. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. They're protecting something bigger than individual incidents. Exactly, Makayla agreed. Based on what Amara told me, there's a systemic issue that could expose them to massive liability if fully revealed. The door opened and Leo Martinez, their media relations specialist, entered looking concerned. You need to see this. He turned on the conference room television, switching to a major news network. On screen, Edward Chamberlain, Atlantic Airways, 63-year-old CEO, stood at a podium in the company's headquarters. Atlantic Airways has always prided itself on providing exceptional service to all our passengers regardless of race, gender, religion, or background, Chamberlain stated, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting authority and trustworthiness. The incident involving Ms. Washington resulted from a seating misunderstanding that was handled inappropriately by staff who did not follow our established protocols. Those involved have been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. He's getting ahead of the story, Jackson muttered. Chamberlain continued. We have reached out to Ms. Washington to offer our sincere apologies and appropriate compensation for this regrettable incident. Atlantic Airways remains committed to creating an inclusive environment for all passengers and employees. What a performance, Makayla said as Leo muted the television. Notice he never actually denied discrimination occurred. And appropriate compensation? They haven't offered me anything beyond that insulting voucher. It's damage control, Jackson observed. The videos of your removal are going viral. They need to look responsive. Leo nodded. Social media is exploding. Justice at 35,000 feet has over 3 million mentions since yesterday. Several celebrities have shared your story. The court of public opinion is definitely on your side right now. Good, Makayla said. But public sentiment can shift quickly. We need to keep the pressure on while gathering more evidence. She turned to Jackson. What about our filing status? Complaint is ready, he confirmed. Civil rights violations, false imprisonment, assault and battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress. We can file today. Do it, Makayla decided. And schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning. Let's make sure everyone knows this isn't going away with a corporate non-apology. As the team dispersed to execute their tasks, Makayla's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Be careful, they're coming after you. Amara. Makayla immediately called back, but the call went straight to voicemail. She tried, again with the same result. Minutes later, her phone rang. Jackson calling from his office down the hall. You should see this email that just came in, he said, forwarding it to her as they spoke. The message was from a tabloid reporter requesting comment on allegations that Makayla Washington was intoxicated and belligerent on Atlantic Airways Flight 3721 before being removed by security. What? Makayla exclaimed. That's completely fabricated. I know, Jackson replied grimly, but it's just the beginning. They're going to try to discredit you personally rather than address the actual incident. Who's their source for these lies? The email claims they have statements from multiple witnesses aboard the flight. Makayla thought back to the passengers around her, the older white woman who had muttered about her being difficult, the businessman who had studiously avoided eye contact during her removal. They're recruiting passengers to lie about what happened, she realized. Probably offering incentives, Jackson agreed. Free flights, upgrades, maybe even cash. By afternoon, the smear campaign was in full swing. A second tabloid published a witness account, claiming Makayla had refused to show her boarding pass and had threatened the flight attendant. A third ran a story questioning her record as an attorney, highlighting the few cases she had lost, while minimizing her many victories. They're pulling out all the stops, Jackson observed during their evening strategy session. I've also had calls from 3 of our corporate clients expressing concerns about our case against Atlantic Airways. Pressure tactics, Makayla noted. They have board members connected to other major corporations. They're trying to hurt our business. It won't work, Jackson assured her. We've built this firm on integrity. Our clients know that, Makayla nodded gratefully, but her concern deepened when she returned to her hotel that evening. The doorman approached her with an uncomfortable expression. Ms. Washington, there was a man asking about you earlier, claiming to be from a delivery service, but he didn't have any packages and kept asking about your schedule. Did you tell him anything? No, ma'am, but he waited across the street for nearly an hour taking photos with a long-lens camera. Private investigators. The airline was having her followed, looking for anything they could use against her. Inside her suite, Makayla drew the curtains and called Amara again. This time she answered. I'm sorry about the cryptic text, Amara said, her voice low. They fired me this morning. Claimed I violated company policy by discussing internal matters. I'm so sorry, Makayla said. We can include wrongful termination in our case against them. There's more, Amara continued. Before they escorted me out, I overheard Spencer and the HR director talking about containing the situation. They mentioned something called Operation Cleanup. Apparently, it's their protocol for handling discrimination claims that gain public attention. Do you know what this protocol involves? Not specifically, but from what I gathered, It includes discrediting the complainant, buying off witnesses, and leveraging business relationships to apply pressure. They seemed particularly worried about you because of your legal background. After ending the call, Makayla sat in contemplative silence. The airline's aggressive response confirmed what she already suspected. This wasn't just about one incident. They were protecting something bigger. Her phone rang again, another unknown number. Ms. Washington, my name is Marcus Johnson. I used to work in Atlantic Airways executive offices until last year. I think I have information you might find useful. What kind of information, Mr. Johnson? Documentation of their passenger profiling policies, internal memos about how to handle discrimination complaints, and emails from Chamberlain specifically directing staff to give preferential treatment to certain passengers at the expense of others. Makayla's pulse quickened. Why are you coming forward now? I saw what happened to you. It reminded me of why I left. I couldn't be part of a system that treats people that way. I tried reporting it internally, tried going to HR, even wrote to the board. Nothing changed. The board, including Trevor Harrington? Especially Harrington. He's one of the worst offenders, uses his position to harass flight attendants, and has had multiple minority passengers removed from seats near his. They arranged to meet the following day. As Makayla prepared for bed, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Atlantic Airways stock had dropped 8% following the viral videos of her removal. Good, she thought. Hit them where it hurts, their bottom line. Her satisfaction was short-lived. At 2 a.m, her phone rang, the hotel's front desk. Ms. Washington, I'm very sorry to disturb you, but the police are here. Your room has been targeted by vandals. We've placed them in custody, but you should know your door has been spray-painted with racial slurs. Fully awake now, Makayla threw on clothes and went to her door. Even from the inside, she could smell the fresh paint. When she opened it, 2 police officers stood there, along with the night manager. The door's exterior was covered with vile racist epithets and threats in red spray paint. We caught them on security cameras, the manager explained, clearly distressed. 2 men. They're being processed at the precinct now. Do they have any connection to Atlantic Airways? Makayla asked. The officers exchanged glances. We can't comment on an ongoing investigation, one replied, but their IDs listed them as employees of a private security firm. Makayla took photos of the vandalism before hotel staff covered it. Back inside, she called Jackson despite the hour. They're escalating, she told him. This isn't just about discrediting me anymore. They're trying to frighten me into backing down. Jackson was silent for a moment. Makayla, this is getting dangerous. Maybe we should consider their settlement offer when it comes. Your safety has to be the priority. No, she replied firmly. That's exactly what they want. If we settle, nothing changes. The next person might not have the resources or platform I do. This has to stop. But after hanging up, alone in her hotel room with the smell of spray paint seeping under the door, Makayla felt a flicker of doubt. Was she putting herself at unnecessary risk? Would pursuing this case endanger others who came forward to help her? The faces of past clients flashed through her mind, people who had faced discrimination and found the courage to stand up against powerful interests. If she backed down now, what message would that send? No, she decided. Atlantic Airways had chosen this battlefield. They would soon discover they had severely underestimated their opponent. The morning news cycle brought a fresh wave of attacks against Makayla. A popular conservative talk show host questioned her motives, suggesting she had manufactured the incident for publicity. A business publication ran a profile examining her law firm's finances, implying they were pursuing the case out of financial desperation rather than principle. Most alarming was a segment on a major network featuring a woman claiming to be a former client of Makayla's, alleging she had mishandled a discrimination case and forced an unnecessary settlement. Jackson's team quickly confirmed the woman had never actually been Makayla's client. They're getting desperate, Jackson observed as they prepared for their press conference. Fabricating witnesses, inventing clients. These are dangerous tactics that could backfire spectacularly. Only if we can prove they're behind it, Makayla pointed out. Right now, it all looks like independent reporting, even though we know it's orchestrated. The press conference was held in their law firm's largest conference room, packed with reporters from across the country. Makayla stood at the podium, her bandaged wrists visible as a physical reminder of her treatment. 3 days ago, I boarded Atlantic Airways Flight 3721 with a valid first-class ticket, she began. I was forcibly removed from that flight not because of any wrongdoing on my part, but because of the color of my skin. What followed was a systematic attempt to intimidate, discredit, and silence me. She detailed the events on the plane, the excessive force used during her removal, and the airline's subsequent smear campaign. She revealed Amara's firing and the vandalism at her hotel, carefully connecting these events without explicitly accusing Atlantic Airways of orchestrating them. This case is no longer just about one incident, she concluded. It's about a pattern of discrimination that has gone unchecked for too long. Atlantic Airways had the opportunity to acknowledge their wrongdoing and implement real changes. Instead, they chose to attack the victim and silence whistleblowers. Today, we are filing a class action lawsuit on behalf of all passengers who have experienced similar discrimination. The announcement of a class action sent reporters into a frenzy of questions. Atlantic Airways stock, already down, plummeted another 12% before trading was temporarily halted. Back in the privacy of Jackson's office, they monitored the media coverage. The class action was a masterstroke, Jackson admitted. They were prepared for an individual lawsuit, but this changes the game entirely and makes it harder for them to personalize their attacks, Makayla added. They can try to discredit me, but they can't discredit hundreds of victims with similar stories. Their momentary triumph was interrupted by a call from the law firm's security team. Ms. Washington, we've identified 2 men conducting surveillance on the building. They appear to be taking photos of everyone entering and leaving. More intimidation tactics, Makayla sighed. Make sure all staff are aware, but tell them to continue normally. We won't be frightened into hiding. By mid-afternoon, Atlantic Airways had issued a formal response to the lawsuit. Richard Spencer, their chief legal officer, delivered a statement that managed to sound reasonable while implicitly questioning Makayla's integrity. Atlantic Airways takes all allegations of discrimination seriously, Spencer stated. However, we categorically deny any systematic issues within our company. Ms. Washington's decision to escalate an isolated incident into a class action lawsuit appears designed to maximize publicity rather than address genuine concerns. We look forward to presenting the facts in court. Notice the wording, Makayla pointed out to Jackson. Isolated incident. They're still trying to frame this as a one-off situation rather than acknowledging the pattern. Their strategy session was interrupted when Jackson's assistant entered with an urgent message. Marcus Johnson just called. He says he can't make your meeting. Someone broke into his apartment last night and stole his computer and files. That's not a coincidence, Makayla said grimly. They're eliminating evidence and intimidating witnesses. It gets worse, the assistant continued. He says he was followed to work this morning, and his current employer received an anonymous tip claiming he stole confidential documents from Atlantic Airways when he left. Makayla's jaw tightened. They're trying to destroy his credibility before he can testify. Get him in here today if possible. We need to secure his statement before they can silence him completely. The attacks continued throughout the day. 3 more corporate clients called to withdraw their business from the firm. A popular blog published leaked emails allegedly from Makayla discussing how to target airlines for lawsuits, emails she had never written. By evening, Makayla lied was trending on social media, promoted by accounts that investigation revealed were largely bots and newly created profiles. Exhausted, Makayla returned to her new hotel. She'd changed locations after the vandalism incident only to find a manila envelope had been slipped under her door. Inside was a printout of her daughter's college schedule, with her classroom buildings circled in red ink. There was no note, no threat, just the unmistakable message. We know where your family is. Her hands shaking, Makayla called her daughter immediately. Maya, are you okay? Mom? Yeah, I'm fine. What's wrong? I need you to go stay with your dad for a few days. Don't ask questions right now. Just pack a bag and call him to pick you up. Mom, you're scaring me. I'm sorry, sweetheart. It's just a precaution. I'll explain everything soon. After ensuring her daughter would be safe, Makayla called Jackson. They're targeting my family now, she said, her voice tight with anger and fear. This has gone too far. Jackson was silent for a moment. Makayla, I think we need to consider our options here. The case is important, but not at the expense of your safety or your family's. What are you suggesting? That we drop it? Accept whatever settlement they offer? Not necessarily. But maybe we negotiate from a position that prioritizes systemic changes over financial penalties. Focus on policy reforms, mandatory training, oversight mechanisms. And let them off the hook financially after everything they've done? Sometimes, the lasting victory isn't about money, Jackson said gently. It's about creating real change. Makayla stared at the printout of her daughter's schedule, the red circles like targets. Maybe Jackson was right. Maybe pursuing this case to its fullest extent wasn't worth the potential cost. Her phone rang again, an unknown number. Hello? Ms. Washington? This is Marcus Johnson. I'm at your law office. Your partner said to call you directly. Mr. Johnson, I heard about what happened. Are you all right? I'm fine, but they got most of my documentation. Fortunately, I kept backups in a safety deposit box. I have copies of everything, including emails that directly implicate Chamberlain and Harrington in discriminatory practices. Makayla's resolve strengthened. I'll be right there. At the office, Marcus Johnson presented his evidence, internal memos outlining Atlantic Airways' preferred passenger accommodation policy that specifically instructed staff to prioritize certain passengers, predominantly white, predominantly male, over others. Emails from Chamberlain dismissing discrimination complaints as oversensitivity, training materials that included racial and ethnic profiling disguised as customer service optimization. Most damning was an email thread between Harrington and Chamberlain discussing the PR risks of their policies while acknowledging their effectiveness at maintaining the right passenger environment in premium cabins. This is explosive, Jackson said, reviewing the documents. With this evidence, we could win not just damages but potentially force a complete overhaul of their corporate leadership. That's why they're fighting so hard, Marcus explained. It's not just about this one case. If these practices become public knowledge, the entire executive team could face removal by shareholders, not to mention potential criminal charges for civil rights violations. As they were talking, Jackson's assistant burst in. You need to see this. It's all over the news. She turned on the television to show a press conference. Richard Spencer stood at a podium, looking grave. Atlantic Airways has uncovered disturbing evidence that Ms. Washington's allegations are part of a coordinated attempt to damage our company's reputation for financial gain. We have obtained recordings of Ms. Washington discussing how to manufacture discrimination claims against airlines. The screen showed an audio waveform as a voice similar to Makayla's said, "These airlines are easy targets. Get on a flight, create a scene, claim discrimination, and they'll settle every time rather than risk the publicity." That's not me, Makayla exclaimed. That's completely fabricated. We believe it's AI generated, Jackson said, listening carefully. The cadence isn't quite right. We can prove it's fake with audio analysis. But the damage is already done, Marcus pointed out. People are hearing it right now and forming opinions. Makayla watched as her professional reputation, built over decades of dedicated work, was being systematically dismantled on national television through blatant lies. The anger she felt was unlike anything she'd experienced before. This wasn't just about her removal from the flight anymore. This was about corporate power being wielded as a weapon against truth itself. Enough, she said quietly, her resolve hardening. They want to play dirty. Fine. But they've forgotten something important. What's that? Jackson asked. I've spent my career fighting against powerful interests who thought they were untouchable. I've faced corporations with deeper pockets and better connections than Atlantic Airways, and I'm still here. She turned to Marcus. Thank you for bringing this evidence forward despite the personal risk. It won't be in vain. To Jackson, she said, Call everyone back in. Tonight we prepare our full offensive. Tomorrow we show Atlantic Airways why they should have just apologized and fixed their policies when they had the chance. As the team reassembled, Makayla felt a renewed sense of purpose. The airline had made a critical miscalculation. By escalating, from discrimination to intimidation to outright fabrication, they had transformed what might have been a damaging but manageable lawsuit into an existential crisis of their own making. And Makayla Washington intended to make them regret every step of that journey. The weight of Atlantic Airways' relentless attacks had taken its toll. Makayla sat alone in her hotel room, the television muted as another news segment analyzed the audio recording the airline claimed was her voice. Outside, rain streaked the windows, matching her somber mood. Her phone buzzed, another threatening message from an anonymous number. She'd received dozens in the past 24 hours, each more vile than the last. The constant barrage of hatred, combined with concerns for her family's safety, had left her exhausted and questioning whether the fight was worth the cost. A knock at the door startled her. Security protocols had been established. No visitors, without prior clearance. She approached cautiously. "Who is it?" "It's your grandmother, child. Open this door before I catch my death in this hallway." Surprised, Makayla checked the peephole. Sure enough, Eloise Washington stood there, her 82-year-old frame as dignified as ever despite the travel-worn appearance. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" Makayla asked, opening the door and quickly ushering her inside. "You shouldn't be traveling alone." Eloise fixed her with a stern look. "When I see my granddaughter being dragged through the mud on national television, nothing could keep me away." She set down her small overnight bag and embraced Makayla tightly. "Now tell me what these vultures are doing to you." For the first time since the ordeal began, Makayla allowed herself to truly feel the emotional impact. In her grandmother's embrace, the professional facade crumbled and tears flowed freely. "They're too powerful, Grandma," she admitted, her voice small. "They're attacking from every angle. My reputation, my firm, even threatening Maya. Maybe I should just take whatever settlement they offer and end this." Eloise guided her to the couch and sat beside her, taking Makayla's hands in her weathered ones. "Let me tell you something about power," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "In 1963, I was arrested for sitting at a lunch counter in Montgomery. The police chief was a man named Bull Connor, a man so powerful in that city that people crossed the street rather than walk past him." Makayla had heard fragments of this story growing up, but never the full account. "They held me for 3 days," Eloise continued. "Threatened my job, my home, even my life. Told me all the ways they could make me and my family disappear if I didn't sign a statement saying I'd been treated fairly." Her eyes, still sharp despite her age, fixed on Makayla's. "You know what I did?" "What?" "I looked that police chief in the eye and told him I'd see him in court. He laughed at me, said no judge in Alabama would rule against him." A smile spread across Eloise's face. 6 months later, that same police chief was removed from office, and I was part of the reason why. How? Because power that depends on fear and intimidation is always more fragile than it appears. Once people stop being afraid, that power evaporates. She squeezed Makayla's hands. "These airline people, they're pulling out all these tactics because they're terrified of you. Not just of your lawsuit, but of what you represent. Accountability." Makayla absorbed her grandmother's words, feeling strength returning to her spirit. "I never knew the full story." "There are many stories I haven't told you," Eloise replied. "Many battles fought by people who were told they couldn't win. The question isn't whether you can defeat Atlantic Airways. The question is whether you're willing to stand firm long enough for them to defeat themselves." As if on cue, Makayla's phone rang, Jackson calling. "Turn on Channel 6, he said without preamble. "Something big is happening." Makayla unmuted the television and changed the channel. A news anchor was speaking urgently. "Breaking news in the Atlantic Airways discrimination case. An anonymous source has just released what appear to be internal emails and documents from the airline showing what the source describes as systematic racial profiling of passengers. We're still verifying these documents, but if authentic, they could dramatically change the trajectory of the lawsuit filed by attorney Makayla Washington. "What's happening?" Makayla asked Jackson. "Did you release Marcus's documents?" "Not me," Jackson replied. "Someone else has come forward. Multiple sources, actually. The documents are flooding social media and news outlets. It's like a dam. Broke." Another call beeped in. Amara Jones. "I have to take this," Makayla told Jackson before switching lines. "Amara?" "It's working," Amara said, her voice tense with excitement. "After they fired me, I contacted other flight attendants who've witnessed discrimination. We've been gathering evidence for days. After seeing what they did to you with that fake audio recording, we decided it was time to release everything." "Everything? What exactly did you have?" "Recordings of training sessions where we were instructed how to manage cabin demographics, internal memos about passenger profiling, emails from executives complaining about too much diversity in first class, text messages between Bethany and other senior flight attendants discussing how to remove passengers they deemed unsuitable from premium cabins." Makayla was stunned. "You've been building this case in parallel to ours." "We couldn't just stand by," Amara explained. "There are good people at Atlantic Airways who've been forced to participate in discriminatory practices or risk their jobs. Many of us have documented these incidents for years, waiting for the right moment to expose them. The risk you're taking is worth it," Amara finished firmly. "What they did to you was the last straw. It showed us exactly how far they're willing to go to protect their system." After ending the call, Makayla sat in silence, processing this unexpected development. Her grandmother patted her knee. "See? You're not fighting alone, child. You never were." The news coverage continued throughout the evening as more airline employees came forward with their stories. Social media exploded with Atlantic Airways passengers sharing their own experiences of discrimination. Justice at 35,000 feet returned to trending status, now accompanied by Task Atlantic Airways exposed. By morning, the narrative had completely shifted. The same news outlets that had questioned Makayla's credibility the day before were now reporting on the mounting evidence of systematic discrimination at Atlantic Airways. The company's stock had plummeted another 20%, triggering automatic trading suspensions. Makayla's phone rang constantly, journalists seeking comments, potential class action participants sharing their stories, and finally, a call from Richard Spencer himself. "Are you shocked by how quickly the tide turned? Has a corporation ever tried to silence you when you stood up for what's right? Comment number 1 if you believe in the power of collective action against discrimination, and number 2 if you've ever witnessed similar injustice on public transportation." Don't forget to like and subscribe to see how this story concludes. Now, with the evidence mounting against Atlantic Airways, will Makayla accept Richard Spencer's unexpected request for a private meeting? "Ms. Washington," Spencer began, his voice noticeably lacking its previous confidence. "I think it would be beneficial for both parties if we could meet to discuss resolution options." "Resolution options?" Makayla repeated. "Yesterday you were accusing me of fabricating my claims for financial gain. What changed, Mr. Spencer?" "The situation has evolved," he replied carefully. "We believe a private conversation might lead to a mutually acceptable outcome." "There's nothing private about this situation anymore, Mr. Spencer. Your company's discriminatory practices are now public knowledge, which is precisely why we need to discuss terms before this escalates further," Spencer pressed. "The CEO has authorized me to present a substantial settlement offer." Makayla considered her options. Meeting with Spencer could provide insights into the company's current state of panic, but it could also be another trap. "I'll meet you," she decided, "but not alone and not at your offices. A neutral location with my partner present." They agreed to meet at a conference room in the federal courthouse, neutral ground that sent a clear message about Makayla's willingness to proceed to trial if necessary. Before the meeting, Makayla gathered with her team to review the latest developments. Investigative journalist Damon Riley had published a comprehensive exposé on Atlantic Airways' discriminatory practices, based on documents provided by employees and passengers. The article had been picked up by major news outlets, amplifying its impact. The airline's board has called an emergency meeting, Jackson informed the group. Shareholders are demanding answers, and there are rumors of a potential leadership change. What about the fake audio recording? Makayla asked. Audio forensics experts have already identified it as AI-generated, a team member responded. 3 major networks have retracted their stories and issued apologies. The Atlantic Airways PR team is in full damage control mode. Armed with this knowledge, Makayla entered the courthouse conference room where Richard Spencer waited, accompanied by 2 other executives she didn't recognize. Spencer looked like he hadn't slept in days, his usual polished appearance replaced by a haggard, desperate expression. Ms. Washington, thank you for coming, he began. This is Patricia Reynolds, our Chief Operations Officer, and Michael Grant, from our Board of Directors. Makayla and Jackson took seats across from them. I understand you have an offer to present, she said, getting straight to business. Spencer slid a document across the table. $20 million, with no admission of wrongdoing, in exchange for full confidentiality and dismissal of all claims. Makayla didn't even look at the paper. Not interested. Ms. Washington, this is a very generous offer. This isn't about money, Mr. Spencer, and you know it. This is about accountability for a system that has harmed countless individuals based on the color of their skin. Spencer's professional demeanor cracked slightly. What do you want then? 30 million? 50? I want the truth, Makayla stated simply. I want acknowledgement of what really happened on that plane and the system behind it. I want structural changes that ensure it never happens again. Spencer exchanged glances with his colleagues before leaning forward. Off the record, there are certain realities you should be aware of before you dismiss our offer. I'm listening. What happened to you wasn't random, Spencer admitted. CEO Chamberlain personally recognized you as the attorney who won the discrimination case against Global Tech last month. The CEO of Global Tech is Chamberlain's golf buddy and sits on an industry board with him. Makayla's eyes widened slightly. Are you saying I was specifically targeted? Chamberlain called the gate directly when he saw your name on the first-class manifest. He told them to find a way to remove you from the flight. Harrington volunteered. To handle it personally, he enjoys that sort of thing. And you're admitting this why? Spencer looked genuinely troubled. Because what's happened since has gone far beyond anything I signed up for. The fake audio, the threats against your family. Chamberlain authorized all of it. He's become obsessed with destroying you, regardless of the cost to the company. So this meeting is what? Your attempt to save the company from its CEO? The board is meeting right now to discuss Chamberlain's future, the board member Grant interjected. We need this situation contained before shareholders lose all confidence. Contained, Makayla repeated. That's an interesting word choice. You're still trying to minimize and control rather than address the actual problem. What do you want from us? Spencer asked, frustration evident in his voice. Full disclosure of all discriminatory practices, a complete overhaul of your policies, training, and corporate culture, a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, compensation, not just for me, but for every passenger who has experienced discrimination, and the removal of everyone involved in creating and enforcing these policies, starting with Chamberlain and Harrington. The executives exchanged glances again. That would effectively amount to admitting liability on a massive scale, Spencer protested. The financial implications would be catastrophic. More catastrophic than what's already happening. Jackson asked, gesturing to his tablet showing Atlantic Airways' plummeting stock price in real time. I'm not just negotiating for myself, Makayla explained. I'm representing hundreds of people who've been humiliated, discriminated against, and mistreated by your airline. People who didn't have the platform or resources to fight back. Their justice matters too. Spencer looked defeated. I'll convey your terms to the board, but I should warn you, Chamberlain won't go down without a fight. He still has allies, both within the company and in the industry. I'm counting on it, Makayla replied confidently. Because the more he fights, the more evidence of wrongdoing will emerge. The truth has a way of coming out, Mr. Spencer. It's just a question of how much damage your company sustains in the process. As they left the meeting, Jackson looked at Makayla with newfound admiration. You could have walked away with $20 million today. And what message would that have sent? That discrimination is just a cost of doing business? That if you're rich enough, you can buy your way out of accountability? She shook her head. Some principles aren't for sale. Back at the hotel, Makayla found her grandmother watching the news coverage with a satisfied expression. The board meeting ended, Eloise informed her. No official announcement yet, but reporters are saying Chamberlain stormed out halfway through, shouting about betrayal. Makayla sat beside her grandmother, feeling a weight lifting from her shoulders. You were right. Their power was more fragile than it appeared. Eloise patted her hand. Power built on injustice always is, child. Always is. That evening, Atlantic Airways issued a statement announcing that Edward Chamberlain had taken a leave of absence to address personal matters. It wasn't an outright removal, but it was a clear signal that the board was distancing itself from its CEO. More significantly, the statement included a paragraph acknowledging serious concerns about passenger treatment policies and promising a thorough review of all practices to ensure alignment with our commitment to equality and respect for all customers. It wasn't the full accountability Makayla had demanded, but it was a start, a crack in the corporate armor that could be widened into real change. As she prepared for bed that night, Makayla reflected on how quickly events had turned. Just 24 hours earlier, she had been ready to concede defeat, overwhelmed by the airline's aggressive tactics. Now the pathway to justice had been reopened by the courage of people like Amara and Marcus, people who had risked their livelihoods to stand up for what was right. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. You're not fighting alone. And, indeed, she wasn't. The battle against Atlantic Airways had transformed from one woman's lawsuit into a movement for accountability that spanned the entire company and beyond. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Chamberlain and his allies wouldn't surrender easily. But for the first time since being dragged off that plane, Makayla felt absolute certainty that justice would prevail. The federal courthouse buzzed with anticipation. Journalists crowded the corridors, camera crews set up outside the entrance, and inside courtroom 4B, every seat was filled. Judge Caroline Foster, a stern 74-year-old with a reputation for no-nonsense proceedings, surveyed the packed room with disapproval. This is a court of law, not a circus, she announced. Anyone disrupting these proceedings will be removed immediately. Is that understood? A murmur of assent rippled through the audience. At the plaintiff's table, Makayla and Jackson reviewed their notes one final time. Across the aisle, Atlantic Airways' legal team had grown to 7 attorneys, led by Richard Spencer. Conspicuously absent were any executives from the company, a strategic decision to distance leadership from the proceedings. All rise, the bailiff called as Judge Foster officially opened the hearing on Atlantic Airways' motion to dismiss. Spencer approached the podium first. Your Honor, this case should be dismissed on multiple grounds. The plaintiff's allegations of systematic discrimination are speculative at best, and the inclusion of hundreds of unverified claims in the class action filing constitutes an improper fishing expedition designed to damage my client's reputation rather than seek legitimate legal remedy. Judge Foster peered over her reading glasses. Mr. Spencer, are you suggesting that the internal documents and employee testimonies now in the public domain are all fabricated? Not fabricated, Your Honor, but certainly taken out of context. Corporate communications can easily be misconstrued when viewed without proper background. I see. Ms. Washington, your response? Makayla rose, projecting confidence despite the high stakes. Your Honor, context is precisely what we're seeking. Through discovery, Atlantic Airways' motion to dismiss attempts to prevent this court from examining the full record of their discriminatory practices. The documents already public represent only a fraction of the evidence supporting our claims. She methodically addressed each legal argument in the airline's motion, citing relevant precedents and highlighting the strength of the preliminary evidence. Judge Foster listened attentively, occasionally interrupting with incisive questions that suggested she had thoroughly reviewed the case file. "Mr. Spencer," the judge said after Makayla concluded, "I find the plaintiff's arguments persuasive. The motion to dismiss is denied. We will proceed to discovery." She fixed Spencer with a stern look. "And I expect full compliance with document production. Any evidence of stonewalling will be met with sanctions. Are we clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Spencer replied, his expression carefully neutral despite the significant setback. Outside the courthouse, Makayla addressed the waiting press briefly. "Today's ruling affirms what we've maintained from the beginning. This case has merit and deserves to be heard. We look forward to the discovery process revealing the full extent of Atlantic Airways' discriminatory practices." Back at their temporary headquarters, the legal team celebrated the victory, but Makayla remained focused on the challenges ahead. "The real battle is just beginning," she cautioned. "They'll fight discovery every step of the way, claiming everything from executive privilege to trade secrets to protect their internal communications." "We've anticipated that," Jackson assured her. "Our discovery requests are specific enough to withstand objections but broad enough to capture everything we need." Their strategy session was interrupted when Makayla's phone rang, an unlisted number. "Ms. Washington, this is Richard Spencer. I need to meet with you privately." Makayla put the call on speaker so Jackson could hear. "After today's hearing? I'm surprised you want to talk. This isn't about the case, at least not directly." Spencer's voice sounded strained. "It's about information you should have. Information I can no longer keep to myself in good conscience." Makayla and Jackson exchanged skeptical glances. "Why should I trust this isn't another setup?" "Because I'm putting my career on the line by contacting you," Spencer replied. "Just 1 hour, a public place of your choosing. Come with security if you want." After ending the call, Jackson voiced his concerns. "It's probably a trap, another attempt to discredit you somehow." "Possibly," Makayla agreed, but Spencer sounded genuinely troubled. "Something's changed. If you go, you shouldn't go alone." "I won't. But I think we need to hear what he has to say." They arranged to meet Spencer at a busy restaurant in downtown Chicago, with private security stationed nearby, and a paralegal at an adjacent table recording everything. Spencer arrived alone, looking considerably more disheveled than his courthouse appearance earlier that day. "Thank you for coming," he said, sliding into the booth across from Makayla and Jackson. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Makayla replied. "What information is suddenly worth risking your career?" Spencer glanced around nervously before speaking in a low voice. "The board voted to remove Chamberlain as CEO this morning. He refused to accept their decision and had to be escorted from the building." "That's already all over the business news," Jackson noted. "Hardly seems worth a clandestine meeting." "What isn't public knowledge is what happened afterward," Spencer continued. "Chamberlain went directly to a private board meeting with our 5 largest shareholders. He convinced them that with enough legal maneuvering and strategic pressure, the company could still win this case and protect its reputation." "And they believed him?" Makayla asked incredulously. 3 of the 5 did. They've given him effective control through their proxy votes, allowing him to continue directing our legal strategy from behind the scenes, despite his removal as CEO. Spencer looked genuinely distressed. "That's when I realized this has gone beyond legal ethics into potentially criminal territory." "What do you mean?" Spencer reached into his briefcase and removed a sealed envelope. "This contains emails and internal memos documenting not just the discriminatory practices you're already aware of, but specific directives targeting you personally after you filed your lawsuit. Authorization for surveillance, character assassination, witness intimidation, all approved by Chamberlain and executed by a private security firm on retainer with the airline." Makayla stared at the envelope, hesitant to touch it. "Why are you giving us this?" "Because I became a lawyer to uphold the law, not subvert it." Spencer's professional facade crumbled, revealing what appeared to be genuine remorse. "I've compromised my ethics repeatedly in service to this company, justifying each step as zealous representation. But the line has been crossed. What they did to you what I helped them do by remaining silent was wrong on every level. This could end your career, Jackson observed. I know. Spencer pushed the envelope across the table. But continuing to participate in this cover-up would destroy whatever is left of my professional integrity. Makayla finally took the envelope. What does Chamberlain want now? What's his endgame? Total vindication. He's convinced himself that you're part of a conspiracy to destroy the airline. In his mind, anything is justified to defeat you, including methods that are clearly illegal. And you're willing to testify to all this? Spencer nodded reluctantly. If necessary. I'd prefer to avoid it for obvious reasons, but yes. Everything in that envelope can be authenticated, and I can confirm its provenance under oath if required. After Spencer left, Makayla and Jackson immediately returned to their office to review the documents with their team. What they found exceeded even their worst suspicions. Detailed reports from private investigators who had followed not just Makayla but her daughter, her parents, and even Jackson's family. Dossiers on potential witnesses containing personal information that could only have been obtained through illegal means. Strategies for creating and disseminating false narratives, including the AI-generated audio recording. Most disturbing was an email from Chamberlain explicitly authorizing whatever means necessary to ensure Makayla would regret ever challenging Atlantic Airways. This is beyond discrimination, Jackson said grimly. This is criminal conspiracy, witness tampering, invasion of privacy, and potentially even terroristic threatening. And it all leads directly to Chamberlain, Makayla noted. Spencer's right. This crosses every ethical and legal line. The question is how to use it, Jackson mused. If we submit it as evidence, Spencer's career is effectively over. He knew that when he gave it to us, Makayla replied. The bigger question is whether to involve law enforcement. These documents detail multiple federal crimes. Their deliberation was interrupted when one of their associates burst in. You need to see this. Chamberlain just called a press conference. On the television, Edward Chamberlain stood before a podium emblazoned with the Atlantic Airways logo. Despite his official removal as CEO, he projected absolute confidence. Recent events have painted our company in a false light, he began. Let me be perfectly clear. Atlantic Airways has never engaged in discriminatory practices of any kind. What we're witnessing is an orchestrated attempt to damage our reputation for financial gain. He continued, his voice growing increasingly strident. The lawsuit filed by Makayla Washington is without merit, based on a deliberately manufactured incident. We have evidence, which will be presented in court at the appropriate time, proving that Ms. Washington planned this entire scenario to extort money from our company. He's completely detached from reality, Jackson murmured. Chamberlain wasn't finished. I remain committed to protecting this airline's legacy and reputation. While I have stepped back from day-to-day operations, I continue to advise the board on strategic matters, including our response to these baseless allegations. We will not be intimidated, we will not settle, and we will ultimately be vindicated. As the press conference concluded, Makayla made her decision. We're taking these documents to the FBI tomorrow morning. This isn't just about our lawsuit anymore. Chamberlain has become dangerous. Agreed, Jackson said. But we should also prepare a supplemental filing for Judge Foster. These documents fundamentally change our case. The next morning, Makayla and Jackson met with FBI agents, turning over Spencer's documents and providing detailed statements about the harassment campaign against them. By afternoon, news had broken that federal agents were executing search warrants at Atlantic Airways headquarters and at the offices of the private security firm mentioned in the documents. Simultaneously, they filed an emergency motion with Judge Foster, submitting redacted versions of key documents and requesting an immediate case management conference in light of new evidence of witness tampering and obstruction of justice related to this proceeding. Judge Foster granted the request, scheduling a hearing for the following morning. When Makayla entered the courtroom, she immediately noticed the absence of Richard Spencer from the defense table. Instead, a new lead counsel represented Atlantic Airways, flanked by an entirely different legal team. "Where is Mr. Spencer?" Judge Foster inquired. "Mr. Spencer is no longer with the firm, Your Honor," the new attorney explained. Atlantic Airways has retained new counsel to handle this matter going forward. I see. The judge's expression revealed nothing. And am I to understand this change in representation coincides with the FBI investigation reported in this morning's news? I am not at liberty to comment on any ongoing investigations, Your Honor. Judge Foster studied the new attorney for a moment before turning to Makayla. Ms. Washington, I've reviewed your emergency motion and the accompanying documents. These are extremely serious allegations. Yes, Your Honor. We believe the evidence demonstrates a coordinated effort to obstruct justice, intimidate witnesses, and manufacture false evidence against my client. I agree, Judge Foster stated firmly. These documents suggest misconduct far beyond the original claims in your lawsuit. She turned back to Atlantic Airways' new counsel. Counselor, I am ordering an immediate halt to all internal document destruction at your client's organization. Any evidence that relevant materials have been destroyed after this order will result in the most severe sanctions available to this court. The hearing continued with Judge Foster outlining an accelerated discovery schedule and appointing a special master to oversee the process, extraordinary measures that reflected the seriousness with which she viewed the new evidence. As they left the courthouse, Makayla received a text from Richard Spencer. Board meeting in progress. Shareholders calling for Chamberlain's complete removal from any advisory role. 3 board members, including Harrington, expected to resign by end of day. The news media swarmed Makayla, shouting questions about the FBI investigation and the airline's changing legal strategy. She provided a brief statement focusing on the importance of accountability before being escorted to a waiting car. We've turned a corner, Jackson observed as they drove away. They're in full retreat mode now. It's not over yet, Makayla cautioned. Chamberlain still has allies, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. Her words proved prophetic when, that evening, Atlantic Airways issued a statement announcing an orderly leadership transition, while simultaneously filing a countersuit against Makayla personally, alleging defamation, tortious interference with business relationships and abuse of process. See, Makayla said when Jackson called to inform her of the development. They're still fighting, just changing tactics. It's a desperate move, Jackson assured her. The countersuit won't survive a motion to dismiss, especially with everything that's come to light. But it sends a message to other potential plaintiffs. Challenge us, and we'll come after you personally even after our wrongdoing is exposed. Speaking of other plaintiffs, Jackson transitioned, our class action filing has exploded. We've added over 200 named plaintiffs in the past week alone, all with documented instances of discrimination by Atlantic Airways. How are they responding to that? Their new legal team has requested a meeting to discuss potential resolution frameworks. Reading between the lines, I think they're finally ready to talk settlement terms that go beyond monetary compensation. Good, Makayla said firmly, because I'm not interested in just money. I want systemic change that prevents anyone else from experiencing what I did. The next morning brought news that the board had finally severed all ties with Chamberlain, voting unanimously to remove him from any advisory role and initiating an internal investigation into his actions. More significantly, Trevor Harrington had resigned from the board, along with 2 other directors who had supported Chamberlain's aggressive strategy. As Makayla prepared for another day of legal proceedings, she received an unexpected call from her grandmother. I saw the news, Eloise said, her voice brimming with pride. You did it, child. You stood firm until they crumbled. It's not quite over yet, Grandma. But the tide has turned, hasn't it? Just like I told you it would. Makayla smiled, remembering their conversation during her darkest moment. Yes, the tide has definitely turned. Thank you for believing in me when I was ready to give up. I never doubted you for a second, Eloise replied. Some battles choose you for a reason. This one chose you because you were strong enough to win it, not just for yourself, but for everyone who's ever been treated as less than because of the color of their skin. As she ended the call, Makayla reflected on how far the case had come, from that moment of humiliation on the plane. What had begun as a personal injustice had evolved into a movement for accountability that was reshaping not just one airline, but potentially the entire industry's approach to discrimination. The path forward remained challenging, but for the first time, Makayla could clearly envision the victory that had once seemed impossible against such powerful opposition. Atlantic Airways had finally discovered what she had known all along, that justice, though delayed, would not be denied. The atmosphere in courtroom 4B crackled with tension as the trial of Washington versus Atlantic Airways finally began after months of pre-trial maneuvering. Every seat was filled, with spectators lined against the walls and a lottery system implemented for public access due to overwhelming interest. Media outlets from around the world had sent correspondence, recognizing the case's significance beyond a simple lawsuit. Judge Foster entered, and the packed courtroom rose. "Be seated," she instructed before addressing the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have been selected to hear an extremely important case. Your duty is to determine the facts solely from the evidence presented in this courtroom. You must set aside any personal biases or preconceived notions about the issues involved." Atlantic Airways' new lead counsel, Stephanie Morgan, a renowned defense attorney with experience in high-profile discrimination cases, projected calm confidence. Across the aisle, Makayla and Jackson led a team that had grown to include civil rights experts and former Department of Justice attorneys who had joined the case pro bono, recognizing its potential landmark status. Judge Foster nodded to Makayla. "Ms. Washington, as plaintiff's counsel, you may present your opening statement." Makayla approached the jury box, making eye contact with each of the 12 jurors, a diverse group that reflected Chicago's demographics. She carried no notes. Every word of her opening had been committed to memory. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and measured, "this case is about more than one incident on one flight. It's about a systematic pattern of discrimination that Atlantic Airways embedded into its corporate culture, training procedures, and daily operations." She paused, allowing the gravity of the statement to register. "The evidence will show that on May 15th of this year, I boarded Atlantic Airways Flight 3721 with a valid first-class ticket. Despite having the correct boarding pass for my assigned seat, I was forcibly removed from that flight, handcuffed, physically injured, and publicly humiliated, for one reason only: the color of my skin." Several jurors shifted uncomfortably as Makayla held up her wrists, the faint scars from the handcuffs still visible months later. "But my experience was not unique," she continued. "The evidence will show that Atlantic Airways implemented what they called passenger management protocols that specifically targeted minority travelers, particularly in premium cabins. You will hear testimony from former employees who were trained to find pretexts for removing passengers who didn't fit the airline's preferred demographic profile." For the next 40 minutes, Makayla outlined the evidence they would present: internal documents, witness testimony, statistical analyses demonstrating patterns of discriminatory treatment, and the airline's subsequent attempt to cover up these practices through intimidation and manufactured evidence. "Most disturbing of all," she concluded, her voice now resonating with controlled emotion, "when these practices were exposed, Atlantic Airways leadership didn't apologize or commit to change. Instead, they launched a campaign of harassment, surveillance, and character assassination against me and others who dared to speak out." She looked directly at the jury, her expression resolute. "By the end of this trial, you will understand that what happened to me on that plane wasn't a misunderstanding or an isolated incident. It was the inevitable result of institutional policies designed to discriminate. And you will have the opportunity to send a message that such discrimination has no place in our society. Not at 35,000 feet, not anywhere." As Makayla returned to her seat, the impact of her words was palpable. Several jurors appeared visibly moved, including an older white woman who discreetly wiped away a tear. Stephanie Morgan's opening statement for the defense acknowledged regrettable mistakes in customer service but denied any systematic discrimination. She characterized the incident as a tragic misunderstanding exacerbated by poor communication and training failures, emphasizing Atlantic Airways' commitment to diversity and inclusion. "The evidence will show that while mistakes were made, there was no corporate policy of discrimination," Morgan insisted. Former CEO Chamberlain's subsequent actions, which the company unequivocally condemns, represented personal vendettas rather than company directives. It was a strategic retreat from the airline's initial denials, an attempt to distance the corporation from Chamberlain's most egregious actions while minimizing their liability for the underlying discrimination. The trial proceeded with Makayla calling her first witness, Dr. Eleanor Richards, Atlantic Airways' former chief diversity officer, who had been fired 3 years earlier after submitting a comprehensive report documenting discriminatory practices in customer service. Dr. Richards, Makayla began after establishing her credentials. Could you explain to the jury why you were terminated from Atlantic Airways? Objection, Morgan interjected. Calls for speculation. Your Honor, Dr. Richards has direct knowledge of the circumstances surrounding her termination, which is directly relevant to the pattern of conduct at issue in this case, Makayla countered. Overruled, Judge Foster decided. The witness may answer. Dr. Richards straightened in her seat. I was terminated 1 week after submitting a 78-page report documenting racial disparities and how passengers were treated. My report included statistical analyses showing that black passengers were 7 times more likely to be downgraded or removed from first class than white passengers, even when controlling for all other factors. And what was the company's response to your findings? Initially, silence. Then I was called to a meeting with then CEO Chamberlain and board member Trevor Harrington. They questioned my methodology, suggested I was looking for problems where none existed, and ultimately told me to rewrite the report with a more balanced perspective. Did you rewrite the report as instructed? No. I stood by my findings, which were methodologically sound. 1 week later, I was informed that my position was being eliminated as part of a corporate restructuring. The testimony continued with Dr. Richards explaining how her replacement had dismantled the diversity initiatives she had implemented, and how her report had mysteriously disappeared from company records. The next witness was Marcus Johnson, the former executive assistant who had provided key documents to Makayla. He detailed conversations he had overheard among senior leadership about maintaining the right image in premium cabins and strategies for managing passenger demographics without creating liability. Mr. Johnson, were you present during a board meeting on October 10th, 2 years ago when passenger demographics were discussed? Makayla asked. Yes. Trevor Harrington presented data showing that first-class sections had seen a 12% increase in minority passengers over the previous year. He characterized this as a brand image concern. What was the response to his presentation? Chamberlain said they needed to rebalance the passenger experience without creating legal exposure. That's when they approved the creation of the Executive Courtesy Program that gave flight attendants broad discretion to reseat passengers under the guise of accommodating VIPs. On the 3rd day of trial, Bethany Keller took the stand. Initially hostile and defensive, she maintained that she had followed standard procedures during the incident with Makayla. However, under Makayla's methodical cross-examination, cracks began to appear in her testimony. Ms. Keller, you testified earlier that you didn't check Ms. Washington's boarding pass before calling security. Why not? I was busy with other passengers. Mr. Harrington is a valued executive member and his concerns took priority. So you took the word of a white male passenger over a black female passenger without verifying either of their claims? That's not how I would characterize it. How would you characterize it then? Bethany shifted uncomfortably. I was following our protocols for VIP passengers. What protocols specifically? The Executive Courtesy Guidelines. Could you explain those guidelines to the jury? Bethany hesitated, seeming to realize she had walked into a trap. They instruct us to give special consideration to certain passengers designated as high priority. And how are these high priority passengers typically identified? There's a list based on what criteria? Membership tier, spending history, corporate relationships. Ms. Keller, I'm showing you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 42. This is an internal training document titled Cabin, Demographics Management. Are you familiar with this document? Bethany paled visibly as she recognized the document. Yes. Could you read the highlighted section on page 3 for the jury? With reluctance, Bethany read, First-class cabin. Atmosphere should reflect Atlantic's premium brand identity. When cabin demographics become imbalanced, flight attendants should utilize executive courtesy protocols to maintain optimal passenger distribution. What does imbalanced mean in this context, Ms. Keller? I don't know the exact definition. Let me help you. Turning to page 7 of this same document, there's a section titled Demographic Indicators. Could you read the first bullet point? Bethany's voice had grown noticeably quieter. Overrepresentation of non-traditional premium passengers may create comfort concerns for core demographic groups. And what are non-traditional premium passengers according to the next paragraph? The courtroom was completely silent as Bethany struggled to respond. Finally, she admitted. The document defines them as passengers outside the typical executive profile, specifically mentioning racial minorities, younger travelers without business attire, and those displaying cultural identifiers inconsistent with premium cabin expectations. A murmur ran through the courtroom. One juror shook his head in visible disgust. Ms. Keller, would you agree that these guidelines effectively instructed you to discriminate against passengers based on race? Objection. Morgan stood. Calls for a legal conclusion. Sustained, Judge Foster ruled. Makayla rephrased. Ms. Keller, when you saw me in seat 2A, did you classify me as a non-traditional premium passenger according to these guidelines? After a long pause, Bethany finally answered, yes. The cross-examination of Officer Daniel Reynolds proved equally devastating to the defense. Initially maintaining that he had followed standard security protocols, Reynolds crumbled when confronted with the airport's actual procedures manual, which contradicted his testimony about the necessity for handcuffs in non-threatening situations. Officer Reynolds, can you point to anything in this manual that justifies handcuffing a cooperative passenger who presents no security threat? I can't. In fact, page 42 specifically states that restraints should only be used when a subject demonstrates active resistance or poses a threat to officers or others. Did I demonstrate active resistance or pose any threat? No. So why were handcuffs applied? Reynolds glanced at Atlantic Airways attorneys before answering. I received a call from someone at Atlantic Airways indicating you might become combative. They specifically requested visible restraints. Who made that call? I don't know the name, just that it came from airline management. By the end of the first week, Atlantic Airways' defense was in shambles. The testimony had established not only that discrimination had occurred in Makayla's case, but that it reflected company-wide policies implemented at the highest levels. The most dramatic moment came when Richard Spencer testified, having been subpoenaed after his sudden resignation from the airline's legal team. Despite the professional cost, Spencer provided a detailed account of the campaign against Makayla after she filed her lawsuit. Mr. Spencer, did Atlantic Airways authorize surveillance of Ms. Washington and her family? Yes. Former CEO Chamberlain personally approved an extensive operation to gather information that could be used to discredit her. And were you aware that this surveillance included following her college-aged daughter? I became aware after the fact. When I objected on ethical grounds, I was told by Chamberlain that everything was on the table in terms of fighting this case. Did Atlantic Airways create and distribute false information about Ms. Washington? Yes. A specialized firm was hired to create the AI-generated audio that purported to be Ms. Washington discussing how to manufacture discrimination claims. I was present when Chamberlain approved this strategy. As Spencer's testimony concluded, the courtroom was silent, the full extent of Atlantic Airways' misconduct now undeniable. Judge Foster called a weekend recess, instructing jurors to avoid media coverage of the case. When court reconvened on Monday, a new energy pervaded the proceedings. Rumors circulated that settlement discussions had occurred over the weekend, but had broken down when Atlantic Airways board rejected Makayla's demands for structural changes to their policies. The final piece of devastating evidence came in the form of surveillance footage from the Atlantic Airways executive lounge at O'Hare. The video, obtained through a subpoena of the airline's security archives, showed Trevor Harrington watching Makayla check in for her flight. He could be seen making a phone call immediately afterward, followed by checking his watch and proceeding to the gate area. arriving late, exactly as he had on the day of the incident. This footage confirms what we've established through testimony, Makayla explained to the jury. Mr. Harrington deliberately targeted me after recognizing me in the lounge. The call you just witnessed was to Edward Chamberlain, setting in motion the chain of events that led to my removal. When Atlantic Airways finally presented their defense case, it was noticeably abbreviated. Several planned witnesses had withdrawn, unwilling to testify under oath given the overwhelming evidence already presented. Their star witness, a passenger who claimed Makayla had been disruptive, was thoroughly discredited when Jackson produced the man's frequent flyer account showing upgrades and bonus miles added immediately after the incident. During closing arguments, Stephanie Morgan attempted to salvage what she could by arguing that while individual employees had behaved inappropriately, the corporation itself should not be held liable for rogue actions by former executives who no longer represent the company's values. Makayla's closing argument, in contrast, systematically connected the dots between Atlantic Airways' written policies, executive directives, employee training, and the discrimination she and others had experienced. "What happened to me wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding," she told the jury, her voice resonating with conviction. "It was the natural result of a system designed to discriminate, a system created, implemented, and enforced at every level of Atlantic Airways' corporate structure." She gestured to the full courtroom. "This case has attracted attention because it touched a nerve in our national consciousness. We all want to believe that in 2025, a person won't be judged by the color of their skin. We want to believe that corporations with billion-dollar budgets for diversity campaigns actually practice what they preach. But as the evidence has shown, Atlantic Airways maintained two sets of standards, one for public consumption and another for actual implementation." Looking directly at the jury, she concluded, "Your verdict in this case will send a message far beyond one airline or one incident. It will either tell corporate America that discrimination can still be practiced with impunity if disguised carefully enough, or it will affirm that true equality means equal treatment for everyone, regardless of race in every setting, including at 35,000 feet. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before reaching their verdict, remarkably swift for a case of such complexity. As they filed back into the courtroom, their expressions gave nothing away. The foreman handed the verdict form to the bailiff, who delivered it to Judge Foster. The judge reviewed the document, her expression remaining neutral. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the foreman confirmed. "On the claim of racial discrimination under the Civil Rights Act, how do you find?" "We find for the plaintiff, Makayla Washington." A ripple of reaction swept through the courtroom, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. "On the claim of false imprisonment, how do you find?" "We find for the plaintiff." "On the claim of assault and battery, how do you find?" "We find for the plaintiff." As Judge Foster continued reading the verdict for each count, the pattern remained consistent. A complete victory for Makayla on every claim. When the liability phase was complete, Judge Foster proceeded to damages. "Has the jury determined compensatory damages?" "We have, Your Honor. We award the plaintiff $50 million in compensatory damages. The amount was substantial, far more than typical for individual discrimination cases. But what followed was unprecedented. Has the jury determined punitive damages?" "We have, Your Honor. We award the plaintiff $500 million in punitive damages against Atlantic Airways." Gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. The punitive award was designed not just to punish the airline, but to fundamentally change how corporations approach discrimination. It represented approximately 10% of Atlantic Airways' total market value, large enough to demand attention from every corporate boardroom in America. As Judge Foster confirmed the verdict and dismissed the jury, the courtroom erupted in conversation. Reporters rushed out to break the news while Atlantic Airways attorneys huddled in shocked consultation. Makayla remained composed, shaking hands with her legal team and thanking the jurors as they exited. She had won more than a personal victory. She had established a precedent that would reshape corporate policies and practices nationwide. Outside the courthouse, standing before a forest of microphones and cameras, Makayla delivered a brief statement. "Today's verdict affirms a fundamental truth. that discrimination in any form, in any setting, is unacceptable and will be held accountable. The journey to true equality continues, but today represents a significant step forward. I thank the jury for their courage and clarity in sending an unmistakable message that justice cannot be denied, no matter how powerful the opposition. As questions shouted by reporters filled the air, Makayla smiled slightly. The verdict speaks for itself. Now the real work begins, ensuring that the changes this case demands actually take place, not just at Atlantic Airways, but throughout our society. With those words, she departed, leaving behind a legal landmark that would be studied in law schools and corporate boardrooms for generations to come. 1 year later, Makayla Washington stood in the bustling terminal of O'Hare International Airport, watching travelers stream past. So much had changed since that fateful day when she had been dragged away in handcuffs, yet airports still carried an emotional weight for her, a complex mixture of triumph and lingering trauma. "Ms. Washington?" A young man in an Atlantic Airways uniform approached, extending his hand. "I'm Michael Torres, Customer Experience Director. It's an honor to meet you. Everything is prepared for your flight." Makayla smiled, shaking his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Torres. I appreciate the personal welcome. It's standard procedure now for all passengers," he explained as they walked toward the gate. "Part of our new customer service protocols. Though I admit, welcoming you feels particularly significant given your role in transforming our airline." The transformation Torres referenced had been comprehensive and unprecedented. Following the historic verdict, Atlantic Airways had initially announced plans to appeal. However, facing a catastrophic drop in bookings, shareholder revolts, and a Department of Transportation investigation, the board had ultimately chosen a different path. Instead of fighting the judgment, they had embraced reform, negotiating with Makayla and civil rights organizations to develop a consent decree that went beyond financial penalties to implement structural changes throughout the company. The result was a complete overhaul of hiring practices, training programs, customer service policies, and corporate governance. As they approached the first-class lounge, Makayla noticed the diversity among both passengers and staff, a visible shift from a year earlier. A large plaque near the entrance caught her attention. "Equality at every altitude, our commitment to inclusive excellence." Torres followed her gaze. "That was installed 6 months ago. Every Atlantic Airways terminal worldwide has one, along with QR codes linking to our quarterly diversity metrics and reporting systems for any concerns." Inside the lounge, several travelers recognized Makayla, offering nods of respect or quiet words of gratitude. Her case had transcended legal circles to become a cultural touchstone, a modern David and Goliath story that had captured public imagination and inspired similar challenges to discriminatory practices across multiple industries. "Your flight begins boarding in 20 minutes, Torres informed her. "Can I get you anything while you wait?" "Just some water, thank you." As Torres departed, Makayla checked her phone. Several messages from Jackson updating her on their ongoing cases. The historic verdict had transformed Williams & Washington from a respected regional firm into one of the nation's premier civil rights practices, with discrimination cases referred to them from across the country. More significantly, the $500 million punitive award, reduced to $300 million on judicial review, but still the largest in discrimination history, had established a new benchmark for corporate accountability. The Atlantic Airways standard, as legal scholars now called it, had prompted preemptive policy reviews at major corporations nationwide, with many implementing reforms rather than risking similar judgments. The settlement funds had been allocated thoughtfully. After legal fees and taxes, Makayla had established the Justice at Every Level Foundation, dedicated to fighting discrimination in transportation and public accommodations. The foundation provided legal representation to victims without resources, funded research into discriminatory patterns, and developed training programs for companies committed to genuine change. A familiar face approached, Amara Jones now, dressed in the distinctive uniform of Atlantic Airways' senior cabin crew. "Ms. Washington, I heard you were flying with us today." She embraced Makayla warmly. "I'll be your lead flight attendant to Atlanta." "Amara, last I heard you were working in training development." "I still do, 3 days a week. but I requested to be on board for your flight. Seemed fitting, given where this journey began. Amara's career path reflected the broader changes at the airline. After the verdict, dozens of employees who had been terminated or marginalized for opposing discriminatory practices had been reinstated with back pay and opportunities for advancement. Amara had been promoted to help develop the company's new service approach, using her first-hand knowledge of previous problems to create better systems. "How is the new leadership working out?" Makayla asked as they walked toward the gate. "Night and day difference," Amara confirmed. "The new CEO, Patricia Reynolds, has zero tolerance for any hint of discrimination. The revised policies are clear, the reporting systems work, and, most importantly, people actually believe they'll be heard if they speak up." At the gate, Makayla's boarding pass was scanned without incident, a simple process that once would have seemed unremarkable, but now represented progress. As she walked down the jetway, memories of being forcibly removed flooded back, but she pushed forward, recognizing this flight as another step in her personal healing. On board, the first-class cabin reflected the airline's transformed approach. The passenger mix was diverse across all demographics, and the crew moved through the cabin with equal attentiveness to every traveler. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Washington," the captain announced over the intercom as Makayla settled into seat 2A, the same seat from which she had been removed a year earlier. "It's an honor to have you flying with us today." A spontaneous round of applause broke out among passengers who recognized her, spreading through the cabin. Makayla acknowledged it with a humble nod, still uncomfortable with her celebrity status, but appreciative of its meaning. As the flight reached cruising altitude, Amara stopped by Makayla's seat. "There's someone who would like to speak with you, if you're willing." She gestured toward the galley where a uniformed man waited nervously. Makayla recognized him immediately. Officer James Bradshaw, one of the security personnel who had removed her from the plane and marched her through the terminal in handcuffs. She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'll talk with him." Bradshaw approached, his discomfort evident. "Ms. Washington, I don't know if you remember me." "I remember all of you, Mr. Bradshaw." "Of course." He cleared his throat. "I've wanted to apologize personally for a long time. What we did that day was wrong on every level, and I've had to live with that knowledge." "What happened to you afterward?" Makayla asked, genuinely curious about the ripple effects of the case. "I was suspended, then terminated after the investigation. Rightfully so." He paused. "But 6 months ago, I was given a second chance through Atlantic's reconciliation program. I'm now part of their security training team, teaching officers what not to do and how to recognize and resist pressure to discriminate." Makayla studied him thoughtfully. "That's a significant turnaround." "It's been a journey of accountability," Bradshaw acknowledged. "I had to confront my own biases and the systems that encourage them. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Ms. Washington. I just wanted you to know that your courage created change, even in those who wronged you." After Bradshaw returned to his post, Makayla gazed out the window at the clouds below, reflecting on the unexpected paths justice had taken. The case had never been about punishing individuals, but about changing systems. Yet here was evidence that when systems changed, individuals could transform as well. The flight landed in Atlanta on time, and as Makayla disembarked, she was surprised to see a small gathering of Atlantic Airways executives waiting at the gate, led by CEO Patricia Reynolds. "Ms. Washington, welcome to Atlanta," Reynolds greeted her. "We wanted to mark the anniversary of the incident that transformed our company by thanking you personally." "That's not necessary," Makayla began, but Reynolds continued. "It is necessary. What happened to you was inexcusable, and while we can never fully make amends, we can acknowledge the debt we owe you for forcing us to confront our failures." She gestured to a nearby wall where a plaque was being unveiled. "This will be displayed in every Atlantic Airways terminal worldwide." The plaque read, "On May 15, 2024, Makayla Washington experienced discrimination aboard our airline that reflected systemic failures in our culture and policies. Her courage in demanding accountability led to fundamental changes that benefit all our passengers and employees. We remember this history not as a source of shame, but as a commitment to ensure Such injustice never occurs again. Makayla was momentarily speechless, moved by this public acknowledgement. We've also established an annual scholarship in your name, Reynolds continued, for law students focused on civil rights and transportation equity. Later that evening, in the quiet of her Atlanta home, Makayla finally had time to process the day's events. The journey from humiliated passenger to catalyst for industry-wide change had been arduous, painful, and at times dangerous. Yet the results, visible in policy changes, court precedents, corporate behavior, and individual transformations, validated every difficult step. Her phone rang, Jackson calling for their weekly check-in. "How was the flight?" he asked. "Any flashbacks?" "Some," she admitted. "But mostly I felt, vindicated. Seeing the concrete changes, meeting people whose lives and careers have been redirected by what we accomplished. It makes everything worthwhile." The DOT released their final report today, Jackson informed her. Their investigation found discriminatory patterns at 12 other airlines. They're using Atlantic Airways' new policies as the remediation standard. So the ripple effect continues. It does. And speaking of ripples, the Justice at Every Level Foundation just received another 1,000 applications for legal assistance. People who might never have come forward before now believe their experiences matter. After ending the call, Makayla opened her laptop to review a draft of her forthcoming book, Justice at 35,000 Feet, which chronicled both her personal journey and the broader implications of the case for civil rights enforcement in corporate America. The closing paragraph caught her eye. True justice is never merely personal. It exists in the connections between individual dignity and collective accountability, between one person's stand and a society's progress. What began as a humiliating removal from an airplane seat became a movement that transformed an industry, not because one person was wronged, but because that wrong reflected systemic failures that had harmed countless others. The measure of our success isn't the verdict or the settlement, but the reality that today, passengers of all backgrounds can board flights with the expectation of equal treatment. That expectation, once revolutionary, now increasingly routine, represents the real victory, not just justice for one, but justice at every level. What do you think about Makayla's journey from victim to champion for systemic change? Has her story inspired you to stand up against discrimination in your own life? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you believe in the power of one person to create meaningful change in the world. Would you have had the courage to fight a powerful corporation like Makayla did? Let us know, and thank you for joining us for this powerful story of justice and transformation. Your support helps us continue sharing these important narratives that can change hearts and minds. Makayla Washington's powerful journey demonstrates that confronting discrimination requires extraordinary courage, especially when facing powerful institutions. Her story teaches us that systemic racism often hides behind corporate policies and standard procedures that appear neutral but disproportionately impact people of color. True change demands persistence in the face of intimidation. When Atlantic Airways escalated from discrimination to harassment and character assassination, Makayla's resolve only strengthened. Her example shows that speaking truth to power can inspire others to come forward, creating a collective force stronger than any individual. The case highlights how institutions often protect themselves rather than acknowledge wrongdoing. Atlantic Airways chose an aggressive defense strategy instead of accountability, ultimately causing far greater damage to their reputation and finances. Perhaps most importantly, Makayla's victory demonstrates that justice requires not just individual remedies, but systemic transformation. Her settlement focused on structural changes that would prevent future discrimination, recognizing that true equality depends on reformed systems, not just punished offenders. The ripple effects of one person's stand for justice can transform entire industries. By refusing to be silenced, Makayla created a new standard for corporate accountability that benefits countless travelers who will never know her name, but will experience more equitable treatment because of her courage. What instances of discrimination have you witnessed that needed someone to take a stand? Comment below, Like this video if Makayla's determination inspired you, and subscribe for more stories of courage against injustice. Share with someone who needs to hear that standing up matters. Thank you for joining our community that believes in fighting for equality everywhere, even at 35,000 feet.